So you know how great, reputationally, you know how great my drawing is. Today I'm going to try and draw and talk at the same time, so brace yourselves for that. I believe in me too. It may be misplaced, Joyce. We'll see what happens, shall we? Especially holding a microphone, this might be fun. Matt is currently trying to make it so that we can read all the words from our Bibles, but this is a great test, you see, because it might not be on the screen, which means you could do with having a look at one. There are loads at the back of the room. Feel free to grab one. We're going to be in Philippians. We're doing a series on the letter to the Philippians. We're going to be we're still in chapter 1, and we're going to be reading from verse 12 to verse 30. Anthony kicked us off a couple of weeks ago now, and did a fab job. And I would really recommend if you weren't here and didn't catch it, then please do check back on YouTube, because one of the things that Anthony focused on was a theme that really runs right the way through Philippians. And Anthony focused on the confidence and the joy that is just right the way through that letter from Paul to the Philippian church, and the confidence and joy that Paul is encouraging us to own and to experience and to have deep within us. And actually, that's a theme that I'm going to kind of continue this morning. So Philippians 1, we're starting from verse 12, and Paul writes this. Now, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. I wonder, do you think we'd respond to that if John got locked up for the sake of Christ? No, I'm not wishing for that, mate, but I do wonder, do you think we would be more confident based on that? It's interesting, isn't it? It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I am in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice. Yes, and I will continue to rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me, we know this bit, don't we? To live is Christ and to die is gain. If I am to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I don't know. I'm torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. But it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain, and I will continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith, so that through my being with you again, your boasting in Christ will abound on account of me. So whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner that is worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then, whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in the one Spirit, striving together as for the faith of the gospel, without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. This is a sign to them that they will be destroyed, but that you will be saved, and that by God. For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him, since you are going through the same struggle you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. I'm going to start with some drawings. I'm going to start by preaching the gospel to you, if that's all right. Partly because it's good practice for me, but partly because it should never get old. We should never not want to hear the gospel. We should keep on hearing the gospel. In fact, I heard this week, the only difference between an evangelist and a pastor is an evangelist preaches the gospel to those who don't yet believe, so that they will. A pastor just preaches the gospel to those who already believe so they'll believe it more. So my hope is I'll preach the gospel to you now, and hopefully you get to believe it a bit more, and I get to believe it a bit more. So I want to preach the gospel to you in a way that I have been able to preach the gospel a few times recently to people who don't believe, using something called 3 circles. I like it because it's visual. So hopefully you can see, and hopefully my drawing will be good, because all I do have to draw is 3 circles, so it shouldn't be hard, should it? So, the first circle is how things were meant to be. God's good design. God made a world that was good. He made a world that was full of flourishing and beauty and wonderfulness, and it was a world that was meant to be shared with us, that we were meant to partake in, that we were meant to rule over and bring his glory into. It was God's good design. But we know the story. And despite the fact that God had made this wonderful place for us, we decided that we didn't want to live in his good design. We didn't want to follow his good design. We wanted to go our own way. And that leads us to the second circle. We wanted to do things our way. We turned our back on God's good design, and we followed our own path. But the problem is that the tilt of our heart, the compass in our heart, faces the wrong way. And so when we walk away from God's good design, the truth is that the only path that we walk into is evil. All we did, and that's what the Bible calls sin. We need to sometimes remember that sin is not like just the bad things you do, but actually it's the thing that is deep within our hearts that says, I don't want your way, I don't want your good design, I want to go my own way, God. I want to do things my way. That's what sin really is. And the problem is that this just leads to brokenness. I'm not going to fit it in. There we go. It just leads to brokenness and death. The tilt of our heart is towards evil, and so all that we do when we leave God's good design behind is we try and do it our own way, and all we do is we create a mess. We create brokenness for ourselves and brokenness for other people around us, and all the other people around us create brokenness for us and brokenness for themselves, and it's all a bit broken, isn't it? And no one wants to live in brokenness. I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you meet people, no one goes, have you seen how wrecked the world is? Isn't it great? Don't you love it here? No one thinks like that. Everyone wants to get back to whatever goodness is. And they might not believe in God, but they definitely want to get back to some sort of good design. And so we all try our very best to get out of brokenness and back to something that is good. And we pursue all sorts of things that actually might be quite good. Maybe we pursue family, and we think maybe if I can just have a really good family and really good relationships, that'll be what leads to the good life. Or success, or prestige, or money. We know the story, don't we? Sometimes those things that we pursue to get out of our brokenness are just bad things, drugs and drink or whatever. But we all pursue something that claims to be the way back to the good life. The problem is that these are like elastic bands. And what we find time and time again is that we reach the end, no matter how far we get down it, we always bounce back into our brokenness. And that can be true, actually, even within religion. We can try and live a really good life. Maybe that's the way to the good life. To just do really, really well, be really kind, do loads of charity work, try and keep God happy. But we always bounce back into brokenness. We always end up reaching the end of ourselves and ending up realizing that we can't get ourselves out. Which leads us to the last circle, which I'm doing much bigger because I realized that I started quite small. I don't know if any of you can read this. But the last circle is God's rescue plan. God wants us to return back to his good design, and so he sent Jesus to come and to do what we couldn't do. Jesus comes and he lives in the midst of our brokenness, but he lives out God's good design in the midst of it. He brings God's good design into the brokenness, an invasion of the kingdom of God's goodness into the midst of the brokenness. And then he provides a way out of the brokenness for everyone. Jesus dies on the cross. And as he dies, he takes the brokenness and the sin and the death that we all deserve and that we're all experiencing, and he nails it to the cross. And he kills it. And then he rises again. And in rising again, you can whoop at that bit. Go on. That was really rubbish. That's better. And in rising again, woo! Because he did it. And in rising again, he becomes king of all things. And he makes a way for us to follow him down into death, to die to the brokenness, a way out that isn't an elastic band that bounces us back into brokenness, but a way that leads us through death and into life and back towards God's good design. God's good design that one day will flood the earth, chase out all the brokenness so it's all gone, and return us to a place of beauty and flourishing. It's good stuff, isn't it? And all we have to do is join ourselves to Jesus. That's all we've got to do. That's it. That's the gospel. You're welcome. You may want to use this. It's quite easy. It's helpful to have the 3 circles, and you don't have to be able to draw very much, including a really awful crown. Sorry, guys. That is just horrendous, isn't it? Yeah, Phoebe's been copying me, which is lovely. So, that's the gospel. And in this passage, to get back to Philippians, in this passage we hear more of what Anthony was talking about a few weeks ago, about more of Paul's confidence and joy. But here we hear why Paul is so full of confidence and joy. And it's because of this. It's because of the gospel that he believes. Paul believes in the gospel of Jesus Christ. In fact, it's more important. It's not just about the fact that he believes this gospel. It's the fact that this is the gospel he believes, and he doesn't believe any other gospel. For Paul, it's about which gospel he believes. Because, I don't know if you knew this, but there's lots of gospels out there. We're not the only people who use that word, and particularly in Paul's time, people use that word a lot. There's lots of things that claim that they are the good news, they are the way to the good life, they are the life hack that you need to make everything better in your life. And Philippi was a place that was full of a gospel, but it wasn't this one. See, Philippi was a place where retiring Roman soldiers were given land to settle down to say, well done, thank you for killing lots of people on our behalf. And they brought with them a gospel. They brought a good news. Their gospel was this: Roma Victor. Caesar is king. He is the ruler of all things. He is the son of a god. And if you live under his rule, then you get stability and beauty and thriving. They had a gospel, and it was the gospel of Caesar. And that's the gospel that ruled in Philippi at that time. Now, I have a feeling that most of us don't follow the gospel of Caesar anymore. I don't think you're going to meet many people who go, oh, I believe that it's the rule of Caesar that brings goodness, because it ended. But you may see some people who believe this gospel. Me and Sally were on holiday once, and we came across this, and it is just a brilliant version of what the world's gospel is. He who dies with the most toys wins. It's the gospel of the world, isn't it, pretty much? Most stuff. Who makes the most of life, who grabs everything you can. Happiness is found in doing as much and eating as much and living as much as you can before you die. Philippi was a place where 2 gospels came head to head in conflict. The gospel of Caesar and the gospel of Jesus. And so Paul opens up in verse 12 here by saying, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, because Paul is worried that the Philippians are going to look at what's happening to Paul. They're going to think, look, Caesar's winning. Paul's in prison. The Romans have put him there. And they're going to be discouraged. And so he says to them, he begins by saying, I want you to know. He's saying, listen up, pay attention. And then he goes on, because what has happened to me has actually served to advance this gospel, not the gospel of Caesar. This passage is Paul communicating the confidence and the joy that he has in the gospel and encouraging the believers in Philippi to have that same confidence. And nearly 2,000 years later, the truth is that we still need to be hearing the same thing, don't we? He is challenging them. Which gospel do you believe? We all see life through a lens. I have worn glasses the majority of my life, but I still vividly remember the moment where I first put on my first pair of glasses. We stepped out of the opticians on the high street of my hometown of Darlington, and I looked up at the town clock and said to my mum, can everyone read that? And she was like, Yeah. I just thought it was sort of ornamental. I'd assumed that it was there just to look nice and that actually the clock itself didn't work. And for the first time, I saw that clock in focus because I was wearing the right things and looking through the right things to bring everything into sharp focus and make everything clear. Paul sees everything through a lens of this gospel, and it changes everything. Suffering, hardship, blessing, life, death, everything he sees through a lens of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So Paul sits there and he looks at his chains and his blistered wrists and his prison walls and his bars, but through a lens of Jesus Christ, he just says, I'm in chains for Christ. When he sees people preaching the gospel, but out of their own ambition or to try and cause him further damage, when he sees opposition from other people, Paul looks at it through a gospel lens and says, what does it matter? The important thing is that Christ is preached. That's what matters. I wonder if we can do that. I wonder if we can look at our hardships and times of suffering and things where it seems like it's all going wrong, and can we say, well, it's all for Christ. It's all advancing the gospel. The important thing is that Christ is being preached in my life. Which lens do we look at life through? Which gospel are we believing? Because whatever gospel we believe impacts our experience of life. It impacts how you are going to feel and live and cope with life. Because you see, Paul goes on. It's because of this that I rejoice and will continue to rejoice, he says. This gospel lens is the cause of Paul's steadfast joy and confidence. It's why he goes on to say, for I know, that's confidence, isn't it? I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. That's confidence. That you can feel the confidence and the joy pouring off those statements, can't you? This is a man in prison, but it's a man who sees everything through a lens of the gospel. If we let this sink in, I've been talking a lot about gospel in and gospel out as a church. Our job is not just to preach the gospel out there, although we are absolutely, it is clear that Jesus wants us to do that. But actually part of that is letting this gospel soak right the way through us too, so that everything we see, like Paul, is impacted through a lens of this truth. Everything that we see, we want to let Jesus show us the world and our circumstances and everything through a lens of his gospel. Because actually what that brings, guys, is deep confidence and joy. Not just one, and we've been talking about emotions this morning, not just something that we can try and well up, or a kind of joy that's through gritted teeth. A deep confidence and joy. A supernatural, powerful confidence and joy, where we can say, like Paul, for to me, to live is Christ, and to die, that's gain. You see, the problem with this, the problem with he who dies with the most apparently, he who dies with the most toys wins, the problem with that is actually it doesn't bring any confidence and any joy. In fact, when you pick it apart, it's the opposite. It brings an anxiety and a depression because you are going to spend your life, if you live by this gospel, you're going to spend your life searching and hoarding and just trying to get and taste and experience and live all you can. And then you're going to look around and realize that there's always more to have and there's always someone who's got more, so you're actually never going to win. And then at the end, it even says itself, you die and lose it all. No one wins with that gospel. But the gospel of Jesus means a present hope and joy and a future hope and confidence, In fact, Paul has such deep confidence and joy that he's torn between the two. He's torn between the confidence and joy that he can experience now, living for Christ, in a prison, being beaten, and the joy and confidence that's waiting for him after his death. See, life in the body for Paul means one thing that is his joy above all joys, seeing the gospel advance, co-working with Jesus, partnering with him. To live is Christ, and that is confidence and joy for the now. But he's torn because the gospel of Jesus also means a future confidence and joy. Physical death for Paul means being with Christ. And he says, and that is, guys, that's better by far. He is in love with his Saviour. And so he can't wait to see him face to face as he is and know him fully and be known fully. You know, Anthony shared last week with us that one of our dearest friends from our time in Lincoln died. And there was sadness to that. There was sadness to knowing how much his wife and family are going to miss him. But there was this moment, actually, when I saw the email, and I just got this tinge of something else. And as I prayed, I was just reminded that he loved Jesus. I have utter confidence in where he has gone, where he is, that he is now with Jesus. And I have utter joy that it is better by far. To die, guys, is gain. It's better. And so, Paul's encouragement to the church is this: whatever happens, conduct yourself in a manner that is worthy of this. Live life and death and everything in between and everything beyond with this in your lens, with this as your worldview, even when it feels like you are dying. You see, the gospel of Jesus, interestingly, has two components, doesn't it? Death and life. Paul says that to live is Christ, because the only way to actually experience any life in this world, both present and future, is Christ. He is the only way to life. There is nothing else. That's what we've been saying this morning, isn't it? There's nothing that's better than you. He is the only way. He's the only source out of brokenness and the only source into life. But Paul also points out that to die in the gospel is gain. You see, in this topsy-turvy world of the gospel, dying actually gets you something. It gains you something. Jesus himself told us that this would be the way it works. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will have to lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will find it, will find life. Our journey with Jesus started with death, his physical death on the cross and our spiritual death with him. You've already died. When you believed in him, you were joined to him. Or as Paul says in Galatians, I have been crucified with Christ. I no longer live. Christ lives in me. The problem with this is it will try and tell you that the only way to life is through comfort and pleasure, through getting the things success now. The problem with the gospel is we've got to learn that actually gaining means dying to that stuff. And it's going to feel sometimes like you're dying. It's going to hurt. Paul knew. So he could look at his circumstances and he'd go, okay, I'm dying it. It's what he's going to say later on. As we move through Philippians, one of the things he will say is, I had lots that you could count as valuable, that this world would say was great. And he goes, I count it all as loss. We'll get there. But that's what Paul's view was. I count it all as loss for the sake of gaining Christ. Living in the gospel means dying. Dying daily. We died once. And we go on dying until one day when we'll experience new life. But it is only through dying to this stuff that we actually gain life. So Paul goes on to say to the church, you see, you don't just get the privilege of believing in Jesus, you get the privilege of suffering for him too. We don't get a whoop for that bit, do we? And it'll feel like it. It'll feel like dying sometimes, but actually it is the way to life. In this moment, Paul's life doesn't look like much. There's not much success there, is there? not in the worldly sense. There's not much prestige. He hasn't got much wealth going on, not much pleasure or comfort. But Paul's view is, I die to all that stuff that I may gain Christ. And actually, the beauty of this gospel is that is one of the most wonderful ways that this gospel spreads. Paul finishes this in verse 30 by saying, he reminds them, you see, what you're going through is the same struggle that I had, and that you hear that I now still have. Paul says, remember back in Acts 16, guys, what was happening when that jailer and his family got saved? Were they out on the streets handing out tracts and preaching really strong preachers? No. I was in prison with Silas, having been beaten and arrested. That's the struggle that he had when the Philippian church was born. And he's pointing out, look where I am now. Same thing. And in Philippi, that moment of being placed in prison, that moment of dying to self, of seeing it all going downwards, that's where they gained life in the church. That's where the church was born. That's how Paul did evangelism. Prison. He got arrested lots and beaten lots and shipwrecked lots. That's how he did evangelism. And he believed that it all spread the gospel. And the impact is clear. You go back to the beginning. It has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. What a prisoner he must have been to have to guard. Just constantly being full of confidence and joy and telling people about Jesus. And he goes on. He says to the church, this is a sign that they will be destroyed and that you will be saved. And he's not talking about the power that will move amongst you or your amazing worship. He's talking about the fact that they are willing to suffer for Christ and die to the stuff of this world and say to live is Christ, to die is gain. And he's saying if you live like that, you will be a sign to this world that they're all going the wrong way and that they need to turn back and that they are going to end up in brokenness, but they can know life if they come to you. It is the most evangelistic thing that we can do, to sing through the suffering, to praise in the pain. It is one of the greatest... No, I'm not going to get through this bit. It is one of the greatest privileges of what I do at church, that I'm part of the worship team, and the reason that we sit at the front is because one of the things I love to do is to turn around and just watch all you worship. Because I sit there and I think, I know what that person's week's been like. We were talking earlier. I know that person is still struggling with sickness. I know that it's been really hard for that person to come this morning. And it is a joy and it is powerful that you come and you go, I will sing of the goodness of God in the midst of that. And the truth is, guys, that when we have visitors walking in, when we have people visiting who don't know Jesus, that's powerful. That's evangelism. When you are suffering and with your friends, and you do it with confidence and joy, because to live is Christ and to die is gain, that is so powerful for the gospel. We don't need to see this times of hardship and difficulty as something that we need to try and pray our way out of before we can share the gospel. When you worship in the midst of a Philippian jail, whatever your Philippian jail is, when you praise God in that, not through gritted teeth, this isn't like a sort of paint a face on thing. This is a deep confidence that comes from knowing the gospel. When you do that, the gospel spreads. That's it. We don't have to do anything special. You don't have to be super evangelists who are on God TV. It doesn't matter. You just live your life through this lens, and it's powerful. So, I went off my notes then. No idea where I am. That's what Paul is encouraging the church in Philippi to do. Have we let it soak in? Do you have a joy in the present of knowing that whether you have a job or don't, whether you have food to eat, whether you have a home, it doesn't matter what you have in this world. He who dies with the most toys doesn't win. He who puts his faith and dies to all of that and lives for Christ, he wins because he wins and we are joined to him. That's the gospel we believe, and it changes everything out there and everything in here. It's the gospel we share, and it's the gospel that we let soak into us. And so, I'm going to do something that I've not prepared anyone for, which is going to be exciting. I'm going to play a song, because we haven't got the band to do it. And I'm going to ask Phoebe to pop the words on. It's the last song on the list. Don't worry, you don't have to panic. If you can come to the projector, Phoebes. It's called Jesus at the Centre, and we should be... We'll have to stop. You may have heard this song. This is going to be our response. I'm going to pray very quickly while everyone else is panicking. Preparation.